Swag Show. My name is appropriately Avrum Rosensweig. Works well. And I am very, very excited about being here today and together with some very auspicious guests and friends of mine. So the show today really is all about a philosophical understanding of certain aspects of Judaism, some of which are imposed upon us, including the question of why anti-Semitism? Why does it exist? Why does it exist the way that it does? And why does it seem to be growing all over the place despite all the work that we've done? A second question that I would really like us to address throughout this podcast is Israel is at war with Gaza. In Judaism, we look at war in a number of different ways, as a chiyuv, as an obligation, as a reshut, as a permissible thing to do. What I'd like to hear from my guest today is, what's your take on the war in Gaza? Is this indeed an obligation? Do we have to do this? Or is it one thing that's permissible? That's a good idea for Israel. Perhaps is there another way? And then finally, throughout the Torah, you will constantly find a discussion around the concept which we call pidyon shvuyim, which is redeeming prisoners. Hostages would be similar to that, to prisoners. The question that I want to address today is, once again with my guests, is how far do we have to go for that? How far do we have to go? At the top of the war, when over 200 hostages had been taken, I said in my own mind, and I regret it a little bit, but I said in my own mind, I believe they're going to be dispensable. I do. Do I still believe that? Not to the same extent, but that is one thing that I would like to address today. What does Judaism say about redeeming the hostage, redeeming the prisoner? My guests today include actually a very dear friend of mine, Rabbi Daniel Korobkin. He is the Mor D'Asra, which is the senior rabbi at what we call the Bayit, Beit Avram Yosef of Toronto. He received his rabbinical ordination from Harav Yaakov Ruderman, Zacharenu Livracha of Ner Israel. He has served pulpits in San Diego, Los Angeles, and Allentown. And Rabbi Korobkin is the past president of the Rabbinical Council of America, which is the largest fraternal order of Orthodox rabbis in North America. So he's a pretty auspicious guy. Menachem Feuer, Dr. Menachem Feuer is with us today. He is an adjunct professor of Jewish studies at the University of Waterloo. He's also taught at DeYuval College in the Department of English and the Center for Jewish Studies at York University. He's written numerous articles, essays, and book reviews on the figure of the Shlemiel in Jewish literature and film from the standpoint of philosophy, religion, literary theory, and cultural studies. I guess that's really finding a niche, isn't it? The Shlemiel in Judaism. Professor Michael Kegel, he's all the way here with us from Budapest. He's the dean of the Ashkenazim, where he teaches Jewish philosophy as well as Jewish thought, history, and literature in the Spaklara of Jewish philosophy. For the greater part of his professional year, Professor Kegel produced Jewish television and online videos. He has taught philosophy and Jewish studies in Canada at York University, Queen's University, and the University of Waterloo. So we have a great group of people here, and we have some tough questions, and I think they're the right ones to deal with it. So let's get going. Welcome, everybody. And once again, thank you very much for joining us. By the way, I want to tell my viewers that Milk and Honey, which is a phenomenal dairy restaurant here in Toronto, has offered up dinner for two for anybody who can answer the following question. Who was my guest last week on the show, and where does he live in Israel? Okay. If you want to win a dinner for two at Milk and Honey, my guests cannot answer the question, nor can my family. Yeah. Sorry, Menachem. That's the way it is. Just the way it is. Okay. So let's jump in here, and let me be really simple about it. It's very clear to every Jew that we are a much hated people, much disliked people. The incidents of anti-Semitism have not increased by 10% or 20% since October 7th. They've increased across America, North America, South America, pretty much throughout the world by hundreds of percentage points. We all know the stories, terrible stories about Holocaust survivors being bothered by protesters, by lovers of Hamas, by Palestinians who are fighting for their rights, whatever those may be. And it's dismal. and it's frightening. And I know many, many people, young and old, who are startled. They're astounded by the fact that we are hated to the extent that we are hated. Now, I always think it's important to add that we have many friends throughout the world. I know that. It's one of the reasons I started Via Hafta, a Jewish humanitarian organization here in Toronto, was so that the world could see who we are. And as far as I'm concerned, we're a beautiful people. And we ensconce ourselves in chesed and kindness, in tikkun olam, in repairing the world, in prayer, in godliness. But I'm wondering, I don't know if I've been successful at it. I don't know if Viafta has done a good job. I don't know if all the organizations who send Jewish kids to Poland and then to Israel to see what happened to us and ostensibly to fight anti-Semitism were successful at all. So the question that I'd like to open up with very simply is, why are we hated so much? Who wants to take that? Michael Kegel.
Did I say I wanted to take it?
No, you didn't.
Oh, that was good. I like that. It's really cool. Let's touch fingers, Nachum.
Professor Michael Kegel in Budapest.
Why anti-Semitism? First of all, just before I answer that question, try to, or not even answer the question, but approach it. I want to say, I'm Jewish, and therefore anti-Semitism is an unpleasant thing for me. At the same time, though, I really believe that there is a profound complement in anti-Semitism, and I don't want to shirk it. I want to enjoy the complement of anti-Semitism. I think it's important to see the complement. I'm sure you know the old joke, two old guys sitting on a bench and complaining about the news in 1939, that they're reading in the Frankfurter Zeitung, and one of them is taking nachas because the Jews are in charge of everything. I think it's important to remember that. Anti-Semitism tells us we're really special. And as much as it hurts, that special message, even though it's negative, we want to remove the negative side of it, but we don't want to get rid of the special. Because I think a lot of combating anti-Semitism it removes the special, as well as the negative. So I'll just say that. In terms of, look, I'm not going to try to give an answer really, but I think it's also very important to distinguish two genres of cause of anti-Semitism. There is in philosophical language, we make a distinction between accidental and essential causes. And there are a lot of fascinating and very believable accidental causes to anti-Semitism, economic, political, historical, and so on. If you read Hannah Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism, you get a brilliant, economic analysis of why anti-Semitism, and it plays into a lot of ancient paranoias, which have a very, there's no simple answer. It's quite complex. That's one genre. On the other hand, I think the deep essence of anti-Semitism, not accident, but essence of anti-Semitism is actually quite simple. And Rav Chisda, I think, names it in the Gemara when he says that it comes from Sinai. He explores the etymology of the word Sinai, Mount Sinai. He says it's derived from the word Sinah, hatred.
Yes.
And the sheer fact that the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us a Torah at Sinai, that is the essence of anti-Semitism, according to Rav Chisda, and I tend to agree with him. So I think, the answer is, to my mind, always has to be kept in its twofold nature.
Menachem.
Wow, that was great. It's interesting. I just spent time with Michael. I was in Budapest, did a seminar on Jewish self-hatred. And it's a very interesting topic for me. And I actually, how many weeks ago was that, Michael? Was that like 3 weeks ago?
About a month ago, yeah.
About a month ago, I gave the seminar. So I think a lot about this question. It's very interesting. I mean, of course, it's a historical phenomenon, but I had just something recently happening on the University of Waterloo when I was teaching my class in Judaism that I think really speaks to this. And Michael Wishkegrad is a theologian. I really like his work. He has a beautiful book called The Body of Faith, God in Israel. And in that book, he has sections on chosenness. What does it mean to be chosen? And there's some lines in there, and I was like, I have to share this with my class. This is a position from faith about chosenness and about being proud of that God had selected us from amongst the nations. to do these mitzvot. It's a beautiful thing. We have to say thank you. We're very happy that happened. There's a midrash about it. So Wishkegrad is very straight up about it. And I talked about it to the class. I read that, and then this is a position of faith, the position of chosenness, and that hatred comes out of this. There's the jealousy. And Michael Wishkegrad talks about it in his book. He talks about jealousy of the brothers. With all the brothers and the jealousy, and like Esav, the whole thing. There's anger and jealousy there. So there's a theological root. But speaking practically, one of the reasons for hatred, of course, you could look at the history of Christianity. There's tons of stuff. There's a great book by David Nuremberg called Anti-Judaism. And he goes through every single historical period and figure, and he shows how anti-Judaism has been a figure, not just since the Christians, but with the Egyptians. And we're talking going back to Alexandria. Brings on all these sources about anti-Semitism. This is an ancient thing. It's an ongoing thing. It gets into every society. Sadly, it's like a virus, and like in the United States, I got my PhD, I did my graduate work, and I know a lot of my colleagues and what they think. I'll never forget, I had a fight back in 2005 with a professor from Amherst College about Israel. And he's saying, oh, they're ethnically cleansing, there's a genocide, and I saw such hatred, such anger. And then people started calling me names for challenging him. These are scholars. So like no longer an academic discussion anymore. It's like, you're an asshole. Just straight up. And I was like, I had an awakening. I was like, oh my God, there is no conversation. You are totally impassioned by ideas about Jews being genocidal, ethnic cleansing. Our main intention of Israel is to destroy Palestinian people. We have post-traumatic stress syndrome from the Holocaust, and now we have to visit upon the Palestinians. I hear this all the time from these academics. And I heard this like years ago. I'm trying to say, it's like, here we are in 2024. I heard that nearly 20 years ago, this stuff. And it goes even before that, in academia. You could look at Partisan Review, different journals. It's all there. New Yorker, all the articles, the whole history is there. But it's an awakening for me, because all this stuff's been taught for so many years that students are indoctrinated, and it's a part of the culture. It's not just in the classroom. There are clubs, like the Students for Justice in Palestine, or the Jewish Voices for Peace. These are funded by Qatar. Major money is going into them, and they are very popular. They have like apartheid week at York University. I was there. They had apartheid week all the time. It's a regular thing. Like it's built into the institution. What they've managed to do is they've infiltrated the academic institution with money and positions and ideology, and it's true. And I've seen it personally. And I'd say, so the reason why people are hating Jewish people is because it's passed down. It's cloaked academically. I see it. I know it's like there's like October 7th is a point of resistance for them, for a lot of people. It's not just some whack out view. Oh, this guy thinks it's resistance. No. It's a trend. There's a lot of people think this. And I was like talking recently to Jim Diamond. I'll mention Jim. Jim, I hope, forgive me for mentioning him, but we went out for coffee the other day, and this was the nature of our conversation. We're talking about what's going on here. Can it be reversed? The hatred, the
Jimmy Diamond, by the way, is a professor. Yeah. Maimonides is a specialty.
Yeah. And he is my specialty, and he's the head of my department at University of Waterloo. And we went for coffee near University of Toronto. We talked all about all this stuff, what's going on, and what we can do. And we actually are talking about a good thing, and I'll announce it here, is we're looking to gather professors so we could talk to CIJA about anti-Semitism. They asked Jim to gather professors inside the Canadian, university system, or teachers, of higher education, and we're going to go to them and give a report and discuss what's going on and what can be done, like a task force. So we're building that right now.
Rabbi, yeah. Sorry, I interrupted there.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's where I'm coming from with this. For me, it's like it's not just an issue that I think about. It's a practical issue. But I have to deal with this. And I'm going to have a university lecture, University of Waterloo. I'm going to have a public lecture on anti-Semitism, Judaism, and what is Judaism and what's anti-Semitism. And I think people don't know. I mean, people in my class don't know about it. In my Judaism class.
Menachem, do you ever get frightened? Do you ever get frightened when you're dealing with this stuff?
What, teaching it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing. It's a really interesting thing. The fright of mass ignorance, mass misconception of other people when they look at you. I walk around with my kippah on campus. I teach my kippah. I'm not gonna take it off. I'm Jewish, and I haven't been confronted, but I see people with keffiyehs all over campus. I see like protests the other day after I got out of class. There was a poster for like Unite for Palestine, something, protest in the square at University of Waterloo. So it's around, I see it. but I haven't been confronted with it. But I know a lot, and I talk to my students in my class about it, and they say, yeah, it's prevalent. They see it a lot. A lot of people have these opinions, and it's hard. They don't like. They feel the Jewish students in the class said they don't feel protected. They don't feel that they're included in the DEI kind of stuff. They talk about it. It's not like just some subject that middle-aged people are talking about or something. Yes. It's an actual institutional issue.
Well, what I love about my group today is that, as I said before, Michael Kegel, who's a professor, is currently in Budapest, has done a lot of work there for the Jewish community, for academia, for academics. Menachem is at a ski resort. And I must tell you, from my friendship with you, mostly on Facebook, I love your adventuresome nature. I just love it. So well done to you and your family. And of course,
they're skiing right now, by the way.
Yeah. So if there's any background noise, you'll know it's your fellow skiers, right?
I told them I need some space. So.
Good for you. And then there's Rabbi Daniel Korobkin, who is a universal Jew in nature. He himself just came back from Eretz Yisrael, from Israel, where, amongst other things, he was harvesting fruits and vegetables for those farmers who could not find workers. So well done on that, Rabbi. Good work. So let me throw this out to you. You have one of the biggest Orthodox synagogues in the world. It's a beautiful edifice up on Clark Avenue. If you haven't seen it, it's stunning. And you have a huge, huge membership. Because of the proliferation of anti-Semitism, your security is up. There's all kinds of memos that you're sending out reminding people how to come to shul, what to carry, what not to carry, how to approach the openness of your Judaism. And clearly your doors are locked on Shabbat and probably in the morning as well. Anti-Semitism has increased, and it's on your doorstep. Why is that?
I'm listening to the two other very distinguished scholars that I'm privileged to listen to right now. And what becomes more and more apparent is that, first of all, you have to ask the question that any person who studies Gemara, studies Talmud asks, which is, Lamai nafkamina. Is there a relevancy if we were able to identify the primary factors or causes of anti-Semitism? And the only thing that we would have to point to is, if I knew what was the cause or causes of anti-Semitism, I could address those causes in the hopes of reducing anti-Semitism. I believe that that's an exercise in futility, because anti-Semitism is the most ancient form of hatred. It has mutated like a virus in every single generation. When Jews have been the lowest class, we were persecuted because we were perceived as vermin. When we were the higher class, we were persecuted because we've been perceived as running the banks and everything else in society. There doesn't seem to be one consistent form or cause for anti-Semitism. And therefore, I'm not convinced that this is really a productive exercise to try and ask the question, why does anti-Semitism exist? I do feel that one thing that we can look at or trace is that quite often, the more open the society, the more accepted that Jews have become within a society, sometimes the more we try to blend in, the more that there's an increase in anti-Semitism. And yet at the same time, there have been iterations in Jewish history where we've been sealed up behind the walls of the ghetto, and there's been just as much anti-Semitism. So there's no rationality behind it. I don't think we'll ever be able to discover it. All we can do is address it and hold our heads up high when the world wishes to squash us. I was coming back to that thought, having just come back from Israel. The world hates us simply because we want to defend ourselves. Whenever we are attacked, the world has condemned us even before we've fired a single bullet, because Jews don't have the right to defend themselves. Like Dara Horn's recent book, People Love Dead Jews. There's a certain romantic ideal about the Jew being the persecuted martyr. But when a Jew tries to thrive and create his own country that is productive and successful, that's when the world hates us as well. So You asked me, Avram, about the whole idea about added security. There's no question. It's well before October 7th. In the last 10 years, I've seen a shul that in Canada, which is one of the safest places in the world for Jews, go from a place that was open just about 24 hours a day to a place that now you can only access with your fob if you're a member of the shul or there's a security guard at the door, and where bags are checked when you first come in. It's gone from the most open kind of society for Jews to one that is quite scary, and that has become to look more like Europe has over the last several decades. And I'm sure Professor Kegel can address what life is like for a Jewish synagogue in Europe and how it's been for the last several decades. So
it's much safer than it is in Toronto, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
These days,
I think a lot of it has to do with the rising anti-Semitism, has to do with the fact that Canada has one of the most liberal policies on immigration of all the countries in the world, where there is very, very little vetting, and there's a belief that once you come to our country, you'll learn how to blend in and to integrate and become part of our values and our ideology. And that is not at all proven to be the case. That has not proven to be the case in Germany or in any other major country that has let in huge amounts of immigrants from the Middle East who, in the hope that these people will learn how to integrate into Western society, what has been discovered is that they're not. And if anything, they are pushing back against Western society and hating the country that has been the source of so much benevolence in their lives. And what we're seeing is that the liberal ends of the of society are embracing that kind of attitude, because the liberal population tends to hate the country in which they live. That just seems to be a pattern that we're seeing in the United States and in Canada. If you believe that your country is an occupier and an oppressor, then you immediately affiliate with the new immigrant class, who also has an axe to grind with Western civilization. So you put those together and you compare that to the Jewish mindset, which has always come to its diaspora host with a tremendous amount of gratitude and a tremendous amount of desire to become a contributing part of that society. And you see an immediate clash between the person who hates where they live and the person who is just very, very grateful for where they live.
So Rabbi, just in sync with what you were saying at the top of your response, you're not sure that it's the right question to ask, and I hear you. The question is so perplexing that many have simply given up trying to answer it. Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Prize winner and Holocaust survivor, concluded that the endurance of anti-Semitism remains a mystery. He described anti-Semitism as an irrational disease, the unsolvable puzzle. He said it is that the world has changed in the last 2,000 years, and only anti-Semitism has remained. The only disease that has not found its cure is anti-Semitism. But I want to push you a little bit on this. I like to push all three of you on this. I am on TikTok and other social media outlets. And obviously I'm, strongly supportive of our Eretz Yisrael, of Israel and the Jewish people. Someone asked me, Avram, who are you? I would say right up in the top three things. I'm a man, I'm a dad, and I'm a Jew. I'm a Zionist. But I will tell you something. In all the words that I put out there in support of Israel and the Jewish people, you know what comes back to me a lot is, if you guys would stop being so cocky, if you guys would stop being so arrogant, right? If you guys would stop espousing this view of the chosen people, right? Then you probably would be liked a little bit more and perhaps hated a little bit less. Do I want to turn us into those who are responsible for the proliferation of awful, evil anti-Semitism? No. But I do wonder, are we doing anything to add to it, Menachem?
Are we doing anything to add to it? to anti-Semitism through what? I'm not sure I understand.
Our character, like you'll find in the Torah very often that the reason for the destruction of the temple, as stated by Chazal, as stated by the rabbis, is sinat chinam, is hatred between ourselves. Okay,
Right.
do we have to look at our own character in terms of the spread of anti-Semitism?
That's a great question. Actually, I addressed that myself. Hatred at a seminar. It's a question Jean-Paul Sartre, and he had a book called Anti-Semite Jew. I mean, it's actually the French name of it is the Jewish question, on the Jewish question. And so for Sartre, one of the worst problems is you have the anti-Semite, and then you have the Jew who goes against other Jews. You have like who's in bad faith, who doesn't see himself as a Jew, and he sees himself as like a German or an American or a Canadian or whatever, or a part of the mob. And then they turn against Jews, and he says they create another, and he calls that bad faith. Sartre calls that bad faith because the person is not dealing with their Jewish particularity, rather they project it. And the whole thing is that people do it. It's like when you're responding to anti-Semitism, one of the things you could do is turn against and say, it's not me, it's this person over here. This is the bad Jew. And that's like the sin of sin, which you're talking about. I think is produced, according to Sartre, it's produced by anti-Semitism, produces that. That's a byproduct of anti-Semitism, is that projection. And a lot of scholars talk about it. Sander Gilman talks a lot about through history. He goes through medieval history into the modern period, and he shows how Jews have been throwing other Jews under the bus, as a response by saying, I'm a real Christian, or I'm a real whatever, I'm a real Marxist, I'm a real whatever it might be. The sacrifice, like Jean-Paul, like Girard would say, René Girard would say, it's like the sacrifice. It's a scapegoat. The Jew becomes a scapegoat for Girard talks about this, like in terms of the Black Plague, Jews were blamed for poisoning the wells. So when they're in conflict with themselves, they're united through us. But then you'll have Jews who say, oh, I'm not that kind of Jew. I'm not the Jew that poisons. These Jews are the Jews that poison. It's like, it's very interesting. It's a phenomenon through history. And I think that we do contribute. And I really worry about whenever I see a Jew going out there and supporting, Palestinians and Hamas and all this, it's mind blowing. It's when I see something like that, I'm like, what happened to you?
What is that? What is that, Menachem?
What happened to you?
What did happen to them?
That's a really good question. The way my Uncle Zev looks at it, he says that there's something happened to them psychologically, something emotionally happened. They had some kind of really bad experience with being a Jew, with Jewishness, and like I had when I was a kid. I mean, I always talk about this. When I was a kid, I had my first experience of anti-Semitism when I was in baseball camp. I was like 10 years old in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. I was really into baseball. I went to Little League World Series baseball camp with my brother. And in my bunk, I had a Jewish guy and I had a Catholic guy. I had all kinds. It's an American bunk. And I had a Catholic guy next to me. And every day he would come and he'd go, Jew, 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 Jew. He would like really be in my face. And I was just a 10-year-old kid. I'd never seen anything or experienced anything like this before. So what I did was I started calling Cassie, Cassie, Cassie. I didn't know what to say.
Good response.
Cassie.
What was the outcome? What was the outcome?
The outcome was bad. The outcome was that I took the Jewish kid in the bunk and I dragged him out of his bunk to show that that I'm with him. And I felt that pain that I felt has been every Yom Kippur, that what I did was so wrong and felt so bad and was so evil that it stays with me to this day. And I was like, I'll never do that again. I will never throw another Jew under the bus.
Yes.
To be seen as an equal. And I had another experience when I was in junior high, which made me change schools. I had an anti-Semitic experience with a group of my friends who I'd been hanging out with since I was in elementary school in Mayfield in the Adirondacks. I was the only Jew in my class. They were always very nice to me. Everything was nice. And one day we were on motorcycles for my bar mitzvah. I got an ATV. That's what you do in upstate New York. You can get an ATV or a pinball machine or a video game console. So I had my ATV and I would go riding with my friends. And one day I was riding with them and they all pull over to the side. And I'm like, I get off my ATV. I'm like, what's going on, guys? Why are you pulling over? This is weird. It's the middle of nowhere. And then they all get in a circle around me and they say that Jason has something to say. I was like, Jason has to say to me. Jason's like, you dirty Jew. He's like calling me all these names, really insulting me in front of everybody. And I turned to them, my friends, and I said, this is so stupid. Anti-Semitism is so dumb. I was like, this is just dumb. I don't want anything to do with this. I'm going to walk away. He's just an idiot. And they took me and they pushed me at him. and they surrounded me into a fight. They forced me to fight with him, and I was humiliated because I was in such shock. He kicked me in the dirt, got on his motorcycle and rode away, and that was the last time I saw my friends or him again. I told my mother after this, I got to change schools. I can't deal with this. This is so wrong. But for me, anti-Semitism is very personal. I experienced it as an American living in a small town, and there was a lot of benevolence to Jews. Religion was never a factor. Like on Hanukkah, they used to sing Hanukkah songs with us, about dreidel, 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 made all the clay, and they would all look at me during the, like, he's the Jew, he's a good guy. We're all singing the Christmas carols and all that stuff together, and it was that kind of sense of like goodness. But then this happened and it made me, really second think, a lot of things in my culture. And I think a lot that's when I teach students about Weimar Germany, the Jews got a lot of second thoughts when Hitler rose to power. One of my favorite journalists, Karl Kraus, a Viennese journalist. I'm reading a book right now called The Third Walpurgis Night, and it was a book he was afraid to release while he was alive because he thought it would increase anti-Semitism. It was released after his death, and the book gives you details of Hitler's rise to power and how, as a journalist, he's responding to it. It's harrowing. I mean, listening to him, I wish he released it. Maybe he would have got a lot of Jews like, whoa, we gotta get the heck out of here. This is like, Berlin and Vienna are not good places to be.
So, Michael, you're in Budapest. You
wait, can I wait?
Yeah, you want to respond? Go ahead. Yes.
I find it interesting, Avrum. You asked a very interesting question. You asked a question whether Jews are culpable to some extent for being arrogant.
Yeah.
That the arrogance somehow engenders anti-Semitism. And Menachem beautifully deflected your question by suggesting that the question is really one of self-hatred, which is actually the opposite of arrogance. So I found that very, very interesting. And I would say, if you don't mind, I just want to continue on this theme. I think it's really interesting because I want to endorse Menachem's point, but also to add something to it. I think Jews are like any human beings. They're often arrogant. I think human beings are arrogant. It's kind of a given. And I don't think there's no amount of humility really on the part that Jews can exercise that will eliminate anti-Semitism. I think it's kind of silly. But on the other hand, I think if I may interpret Menachem's point, maybe push it a little further, I think the real problem is not that Jews are arrogant. I think that the real problem is that Jews lack arrogance. If we were given the mandate for total, absolute, holy arrogance at Mount Sinai, we were told, you are a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, you and only you. That's an incredibly arrogant title to take on. And we shirk that title again and again. We cannot handle that level of arrogance. And so long as we can't handle that level of arrogance, then the nations will be upset with us because the title is there. The title is not going to go away. Anyone who's a self-respecting Christian with a little bit of literacy knows their Bible and knows that it says very clearly that we are the chosen people. We have a divinely, cosmically mandated arrogance. They know that. And the only question is whether we can live up to that arrogance. We need to come to terms with it. And we have a very hard time coming to terms with it because, of course, at the same time, we're also asked to be God-fearing and sensitive to other human beings and cosmopolitan. And after all, to be mamleches kohanim, to be a Kohen is not to be an arrogant person in the sense of taking advantage of other people, like a bad pope. We're not supposed to arrogate power to ourselves and take advantage of others. But the station of holy, kahuna is there. And it seems to me that so long as we're not embracing it fully, then there's no possibility of anti-Semitism going away. It's impossible. Anti-Semitism, I heard there was a guy in my class yesterday, a very sweet Hungarian man who said, he quoted, I don't remember the Hungarian writer, it maybe exists in another language as well. This guy was asked, a non-Jew was asked, what is anti-Semitism? And he said, anti-Semitism is hating a Jew more than is necessary. I thought that was really,
fascinating.
Funny.
What does that mean? What does that mean, Michael? What does that mean?
Well, what it means is exactly what Rav Chisda says about Har Sinai. You see,
Yeah.
what it means is that it's necessary to hate the Jew. It's part and parcel of our culture. And here, I'm speaking of Christian culture, and we have to be careful because Islam is not the same as Christianity. I mean, the way that anti-Semitism developed in Muslim countries is not the same as it developed in Europe. And when we talk about anti-Semitism, we're really talking about European Christian anti-Semitism that has been recently appropriated for less than a century by Muslims, right? It's not the same anti-Semitism. And so this Christian, European, and therefore American anti-Semitism is predicated on a very real necessity. It's necessary to hate the Jew, but not too much. If you hate the Jew too much, then you're an anti-Semite, but it's definitely necessary to hate the Jew.
Necessary. Rabbi, you agree with that?
Yeah.
Rabbi, you agree with that?
Well, I agree to the extent that Jews have always been held to a higher standard based on what Michael is suggesting, based on Sinai, based on the fact that we represent what God's standard is of humanity. So, unfortunately, the world is much more unforgiving of the Jew who shows that he is imperfect. And it's for that very reason. There is a midrash that when there was a famine in a famine in Canaan, and Yaakov sent his sons down to go get provisions, he said to them, Lama titra'u, what are you still doing here? Why are you still? But the language of the verse is Lama titra'u, why are you appearing in a certain way? And our sages tell us that even though Jacob and his family had ample provisions, it never looks good for the Jew to stand out or to be boastful or to have the appearance of having when the rest of the world doesn't have. Because of that very reason, the world is more unforgiving of the Jew, because whether it's conscious or
You cutting out there, Rabbi? I'm missing something important here. Okay.
A higher standard because we by our own.
Okay, we're gonna have to.
Did you lose me?
Yeah, well, you're back now, though. What were you saying? Sorry. There we are. You're
the
there.
world is more unforgiving of the Jews.
Yeah, why? Why is the world more unforgiving? Why?
Because we're the chosen people.
Our theology basically states that we are the chosen people. We represent what God expects of humanity. And when we fail in that task, the world recognizes it and calls us out for it. When
your child, no, hang on a second. When your child who's very prolific in nature, your child who's very talented, goes to school and he's sort of the Wayne Gretzky of his classroom and so on. You tell your child, relax, don't get too haughty, right? Be humble, right? And I know we're the chosen people. I get that. And obviously that requires definition. Are we humble enough? Are we humble people, Rabbi?
We probably, there's always room for improvement. But I would say this, the whole premise of our conversation today, specifically because we're in the midst of war, it requires us to stay focused on where we are today as a people. I would submit to you that we are all on the battlefield right now, whether we're on the literal battlefield in Gaza or whether we're on the proverbial battlefield in the rest of the world. Focusing on our inadequate humility while you're in the midst of battle is not a very helpful exercise.
Okay.
So what I would advocate for is, once this war is over and either we're all back in Israel or the world has regained sanity to some degree or another, I think we can have a rational conversation of how much do we contribute to the anti-Semitism in the world. But that's not for now.
Okay, point well taken. So let's move on to the next question. We are right now smack in the middle of the war with Hamas. One could argue with the Palestinian people, with many Arab countries. We have enough enemies to go around. There's an argument within Judaism about what a war is. Is it a milchemet reshut? Is it one which is permissible to do, to undertake? Is it one which is a chiyuv, which is an obligation? And it's a very compelling conversation. And I think it's happening in certain corners of the world. Some people feel very strongly that there's no question in the Jewish mind that we need to do this. We have to eradicate evil because evil's trying to eradicate us. Other people feel differently, that it's not proportionate in nature, that we need to tone it down, that perhaps the reshut that we're looking at is a little bit too much. Menachem, how are we as Jews, as Eretz Yisrael, as the IDF, supposed to be responding to the evil perpetrated on October 7th by Hamas terrorists?
Well, I'm not a military strategist. My father was a operations research guy for Lockheed Martin, and I was always very interested in war strategy. I grew up with those types of thoughts. My dad was Clausewitz and all that stuff. But this is a just war. I think, as they say, there's a whole discussion in philosophy about what's a just war, what justifies war. This is certainly it. This has been for a long time. Jewish people, the state is defending the Jewish people. That is what they have to do. That's what they're obligated to do. And they have to go in there and they have to eliminate the threat of Hamas. Hamas is the threat of death, existential death to the Jewish people. And you have to eliminate that. That's what a state's supposed to do. A state is supposed to take care of these evil actors that threaten the existence of your people. And a state that does not do that is not a just state. That is a rogue state. It's not doing its job. It's like out of control, and something has to be done about it. Right now, there's a lot of trust in the IDF. The IDF is, it's really interesting. The International Crime Court, all this stuff is happening right now. It's like mind blowing. You feel like you're in a movie because this has never happened before. It's all happening, and you're like, okay, if they say it's genocide, what does that mean? And I remember I made a mistake when I first saw the footage, and I told my wife, and she starts crying. And I was like, oh, I made a wrong interpretation. I'm sorry. I'd like go back on it because initially, that was my first thought about this. But it's like something, it's like Durban, Zionism is racism, all these types of things that internationally are declared. What I love about the Jewish people, what I love about Israel is that they don't stop. They don't care. And now the world is getting experience of that with this globalizing the Intifada. Now it's like, okay, I get it. We have to do this. I'm not going to cave into these people. I mean, this is ridiculous. These people are ridiculous. They're uninformed and they're crazy. And they whatever pressure they put on me, we have to keep on fighting. This makes the Jew strong. It makes us hard. This is war, and it's important to be, I love the Shlomiel character. He's a very humble character. He's not a warrior. He's the opposite of a warrior. Like if you look at the Yiddish classic, Benjamin III, The Travels and Adventures of Benjamin III by Mendel Mocher Sforim, the main characters, there's two of them. It's a comedy duo. It's like, the Odd Couple, these two guys. They think that they're going to leave the shtetl and they have all these adventures. They have these fantasies. It's like a Don Quixote, Jewish Don Quixote. They have all these fantasies about what the world is really like out there from books that they read. It's like, so the whole time they're traveling around, they're making up all these things that are happening and they're really not happening. It's all fantasy. And like we as readers are looking at you Shlomiels, you guys you're in a fantasy of leaving the shtetl and you can't leave the shtetl. And then in the end of the book, something very interesting happens. The Russian army gets a hold of both of them. They kidnap them. They take them hostages and they bring them into the, to the barracks to fight for the Russian army. And they get up to their physical, they get up to their test. And then one of the generals is like, these guys are ridiculous. You can't have them in the military. They can't fight for us. So their life is saved by their foolishness, by their Shlomiels. And it's been traditionally a thing is that Jews don't fight. And Israel is a novelty for that reason. Israel is a novelty. Yes, we do. After the Holocaust, yes, we do fight. And we are fighters. We have a history of that. And it's been lost in the diaspora. And here we are, and we have it, and we are warriors. We have a history of warriors. And I know some biblical criticism people. I'm teaching, a class in Judaism, University of Waterloo. They'll say, oh, well, this whole thing, how do you understand, Judaism and the warrior aspect of it? Like Daniel Boyarin in Berkeley, the professor Daniel Boyarin has a book called Unheroic Conduct. And his whole thing is like, no, a Jew is an appeaser. That's what Jews do. And he cites rabbis in the Talmud. It's like, no, you're not looking at a whole part of the Jewish tradition. You're like, basically, you have your interpretation is very narrow. And all you're doing is signifying an ideology, which is like, all over academia. But that's why I think it's a just war, and these guys are schmucks. They're putzes. They're Jews. I love them, but I gotta go sit down with them and say l'chaim and say, what's going on?
Michael Kegel, last week we, it was very clear to us that God made every effort to let the Jewish people know that while it was good that the Egyptians, Pharaoh and his warriors on their chariots were killed, because that meant the saving really of the Jewish people, there's also a lot of discussion around compassion for all God's creations, right? Making sure that we don't sit back and dance and drink and party over the death of even the Egyptians, who were very evil towards us. How should we be dealing with that and all the deaths in Gaza today?
Well, if I might just slightly disagree with Rav Korobkin, he said that this is not a time to consider questions, metaphysical questions of humility, when there are much more urgent, more immediate military issues at stake. In a sense, I do agree with him. I mean, look, my father fought in the 6-Day War and in the Yom Kippur War. We moved to Canada because of the Yom Kippur War. My uncle was wounded in the Yom Kippur War. So, I'm definitely not a pacifist. At the same time, I can't imagine a more auspicious moment to think about Jewish humility than precisely a war, and precisely for the reason that you mentioned. And I would also disagree with Menachem. I'm not at all convinced that this is a just war. I am convinced that it's a necessary war. And, my wife and my daughter are now in Yerushalayim, and we were there on October 7th, in Simchas Torah, and I was anxious about getting home when I heard sirens overhead. And, I'm definitely, in a practical sense, very anxious about the whole thing. But to this day, the most modest counts of Palestinian lives lost is 15,000, right? I mean, the Palestinian Health Organization claims 25,000. Let's say they're inflated. Let's say it's only 10,000. Let's be really generous. 10,000 dead Palestinians. So, am I comfortable with that number? By no means am I comfortable with that. By no means. Is it a just war? Are we justified? Are we truly going to throw words around like tzedek and justice when we consider the lives of 10,000 human beings made in God's image?
Well, Michael, I'll retort to that.
Not at all.
I'll retort to that briefly. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. Like, I'm teaching Judaism right now, and I have to select texts that I want to share with students who are Jewish, Jews and non-Jews in the class. And one of the texts that I had a problem dealing with was the book on Shmuel, on dealing with Shmuel with the Amalek and destroying all the people, including children.
This is not Amalek. The Palestinians.
I know, but I'm just saying, like.
No, but there's a difference. But the nafkamina is important. We can't just say Palestinians are Amalek. That's very irresponsible.
Right. I know. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that's the extreme. I'm saying within Judaism you have that tradition, and you also have, but in every war, I mean, David Melech fought wars that were not just, and you could say in your view because people died. Every war people died, and it's absolutely horrible. Was the World War II a necessary war, a just war? There are a lot of people, millions of people died there too. Dresden happened. There's a lot of things that happened. There are a lot of people.
In a war, people die. In a war, people die. So in every war, people die by definition.
Absolutely.
So if we speak of a just war, by definition, we're talking about the justice of people dying. It's not possible to have a war without people dying. So the whole concept of just war, it's clear that people are dying. The question is not whether people are dying. The nafkamina, to define the justice, is not the death of people. It's a different issue other than that, right? So the question is, what would make this a just war, and is it a just war? There are many wars in Jewish history, both in Tanakh and beyond, and some of them might be considered just and which not. So the question is definitional. What is a just war? Personally, this doesn't strike me as a just war. Again, it may be a necessary war, but to claim justice, actual justice in the way that we understand tzedek according to the Eibishter, are we clear about that? I mean, I'm not a Navi. And no Navi has come up to me and said, "Oh, this war is jihad. It's a holy and just war." That I'm not convinced at all by that.
Okay, Menachem, hold on for a second. I want to hear where the rabbi weighs in on this.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, I'm not going to address the issue of whether it's just or not. I'm satisfied with saying that it's necessary, and I'll come back to the point that I started with. There is a time for for contemplation and philosophy. There's also a time of eliminating our enemy, and this is the time. Now, I'm not a military strategist, and I would venture to say that neither are my co-panelists, and that none of you have served as generals of the IDF to know what the best strategy to eliminate Hamas is. I do attribute most of the casualties, if not all of them, to the tactics of Hamas using human beings as human shields to maximize the amount of civilian casualties so that Israel can look bad. And that's Hamas's ideology. They idolize and adulate death, and that's what they want the world to see. They want the world to see that Israel is killing their civilians so that they can villainize the Jews once again. And so I blame Hamas for every single casualty. I don't know what the solution is because I'm not a military person, but I do know that we lost last week. We lost 21 soldiers due to the fact that they went carefully into a building to try to make sure that there were no human beings inside, when they could have equally just as effectively flattened it by a drone. And the cost of human life on the Israeli side is extremely high because of the great care and concern that we are demonstrating in trying to clean out a hornet's nest where the hornets are hiding behind regular people. So I'm not going to guess whether it's just or not. I will submit that it is necessary, and I'm also not going to second guess whether the casualties are too high or not. I don't think that I'm in the position, or are either of my panelists in the position to make a surmisal of that.
Rabbi, I want to segue.
In no way did what I say. In no way did I mean for it to be a military opinion. It has nothing whatsoever to do with a strategic question. I'm just talking about the loss of human life, which is a deeply moral question. And I think war is a good time to ask moral questions. Obviously, it's a good time to fight too, but to suggest that war is not a time for moral questions, I don't know. I thought Jews are supposed to have moral questions all the time. I mean, the Torah doesn't say, you know what, this is what we do in peacetime. And in wartime, whatever the hell it takes, just kill them. We have a lot of halachas about war. We have a lot of ways of being responsible about tough and, nashim, and about the way we take a shovel to war. We have a lot of things that we have to do in war. And why shouldn't now be a time to raise these questions? Why?
Right, and that's precisely the point I'm raising. I think you need to leave that up to the rabbis that are part of Tzahal. I think you need to leave that up to the military strategists who have been taught the ethics of war. For you and I to sit, whether it's in Budapest or Toronto or wherever we are, and to start to pontificate as to whether there's too many casualties or whether we're fighting a moral or just war, I think is inappropriate. I don't think it's not our role to do that. And if you want to ask a question and say, is it? So then don't make assumptions about what the Israeli army is or is not doing. I'm hearing from multiple sources, having just been in Israel, that Israel is fighting as moral as it possibly can in a horrible situation where Hamas is trying to maximize civilian casualties. So
what if that's precisely injustice? In other words, what if a just war would be to go in there and to just nuke them? I'm not. It's not about. Yeah, I don't want to.
To be honest with you guys, honestly, I want to have this discussion. Like, what is the telos for justice in Judaism? What makes a just war? I mean, honestly, I'm more interested in asking that.
Me too. I'm very.
I don't really want to have. I don't have answers. I'm just like giving you a basic answer, like philosophy 101 on a just war for a necessary, and according to English tradition, Anglo tradition. But I'm very interested in like what Judaism has to say, and then what would be the telos? What would be the end to justify the means? What would be the end to justify what makes something a just war? I'd like to know that. I mean, would it be like taking over all Israel? Like what does it mean?
Well,
Eliminating all obstacles? Like what does that mean?
Well, Menachem, what do you think? I mean, isn't the very question of the validity of the state of Israel, isn't that in question? I'm not talking about the minuscule questions of what makes a just war. And, oh, well, there's 1,000 casualties. Oh, that's not just. But if you kept it down to 950, that would be fine. I'm not talking about those details. Obviously, those are important halachic questions. But there's the overarching question, which ties into anti-Semitism and the confidence of the Jewish people. Are we confident? Like when we go to war, we should be incredibly confident that it's okay to kill people. Not about numbers. It's not a number. One person.
I'm gonna go deeper philosophically there. Okay. What does it mean to be confident of something philosophically?
So listen. So let me give you a scenario. You're walking. You have to, when you have a good war, right? A good Jewish war. You have to be able to go into a place and say, I don't know, kill I don't know, a child, right? Because he's blocking because a Hamasnik is putting him in front of him, and a bunch of other people, and you have to feel confident. You have to feel confident down to your core that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the universe allows you to kill that child, and without being racked with bad conscience for the rest of your life. Obviously, you're not going to be totally happy about it, but on some level, you have to feel that this war, it's okay to do this. And clearly, Tzahal today doesn't feel it's okay. The world opinion is bearing down on it, and we feel like no. We have to fight a war by the rules of the United Nations and America and so on. Maybe we have to be a lot more vicious than we are. But
where does the justice happen? Does the justice happen with, like the rabbi is saying, with the Sahal, the rabbis of the Sahal? Do they make decisions about just wars?
Well, look, isn't justice? I mean, I'm not talking about specific halachic questions. I'm talking about the sense of justice. Don't we, as the Jewish people, don't we have to feel confident about our rights to the land of Israel and this right extending, to the right to kill human beings? Or are we criminals just by owning the land? I mean, why not live in New York and Toronto or Budapest, which is a good place to live where we don't have to kill anyone?
So you're saying confidence is a confidence in an idea. So what would that idea be?
Whenever you're in a fight, whether it's a fist fight, sorry? All I want to say is whenever you're in a fight.
I'm sorry. I don't. No.
Sorry.
I was just going to say that I think that that's a legitimate question to ask if you're being transported back to 1947 or 48. I don't think that that's a legitimate question to ask in 2024. We've already established that we have borders and we have our own country. Every country, not just Israel, has a right to defend its borders and defend its citizenry. When we are attacked, we have a right to fight back and to kill as many people as necessary to secure our borders. Those are the rules of war.
Well,
and so I think that what you're underscoring is that we as the Jewish people have the biggest conscience of every other nation. We are the ones that want to make sure that the International Court of Justice is going to approve of what we're doing. No other country is bending over so backwards in order to make sure that the world approves of us. And if the world doesn't approve of us, we become anxious. I think that in itself is part of the problem of the Jewish psyche.
I totally agree with the last point, but I find it a little bit in tension with the earlier point you made, which is that we are abiding by international standards of war, and we have just as much a right to exist as any people. That's a very nice argument for any people. If we're any people, and we just like the Hutus and the Tutsis and the Irish and the Italians, we all have a right to our to defend our lives. That's fine, but we know. The world is telling us that when it comes to Israel and the Jewish ownership of Israel, there's much, much more at stake than that. And for us to simply rely on the United Nations, rules of what it means to have a nation and what it means to be able to kill people for the sake of having a nation, everyone knows that that's a bluff. We're being unclear. We're giving a double message. On the one hand, we're saying, oh, well, yes, we are God's people. We're the chosen people. We have a connection to this land that goes back to Abraham and so on. On the other hand, we're saying, no, we're abiding by international laws. Well, you can't have it both ways. I mean, you can, for practical purposes, you can say, look, we're fighting by the fair rules of the UN, but then don't pretend to be a special people. You're just like any people. You're just a bunch of jerks like any people in the world. You're just as much a bunch of jerks as the Palestinians are, or anyone. And there's nothing particularly noble about your existence, nothing particularly noble about the state. And it's actually questionable, if you're looking at recent history, in any case, in an area which is dominated by Islam and by Arabs, it's a very questionable form of colonialism, of European colonialism for Jewish Europeans, essentially, because Israel was essentially an Ashkenazi enterprise that began here in Budapest, right? It's questionable that whether we have a right to do that.
Yeah, I don't follow the logic. I think there's not a contradiction in saying that we are the chosen people and are being held to a higher standard.
Yes,
and at the same time trying to demonstrate to the world, at least as best as we can, when the world says that we are substandard, that we're the ones that are committing the genocide, we have a right to push back and say, no, we're not. In other words, the world is holding us to a higher standard because they, whether tacitly or explicitly, to task for being the chosen people. And as a result, not only are they saying that we're not, they're not saying that we're doing like every other nation. They're saying that we're doing less than every other nation, when that's patently not true. And that's clearly not the case to anyone who's thinking about this rationally. So that's where we have a right to push back and say, the hell with what the rest of the world thinks. And we have to just continue soldiering on and have confidence in the fact that the ethicists at the IDF have the same conscience that you and I have and are being held to a very, very high standard, a standard that's probably higher than just about any other army in the world, including the US and Canada, and continue to have confidence that this war is being fought in as careful and as conscientiously a way as possible.
Folks, I want to move into the third question here. That was a very robust argument and probably did really well for my ratings, so thank you. And my Jewishness, of course. I was listening to a wonderful share by Rav Asher Weiss, who is considered to be one of the Gedolei Hador, one of the great leaders amongst the Jewish people in terms of his thinking and his leadership. With by and large in the Haredi community, but the beauty of Rav Asher Weiss is that he goes outside of it as well. He's accessible on YouTube. He gives shiurim in Hebrew and English and Yiddish, and I really, really respect that. I personally have had not the greatest experiences with Gedolei Hador in my life, but I'm really, really passionate about him and his life. He's a lovely human being. He gave a wonderful share on rescuing hostages, and essentially, let me tell you just in a nutshell, he went through what we call in Aramaic a whole shakla v'taryag, right? A back and forth about what Jewish people have done historically. And much of it you'll find in the Talmud. Have we saved hostages? And by and large, when you take a look at the Talmud and Jewish writings, you see that in essence, we've saved hostages, but not always prisoners. And the reason for that, in a nutshell, is because if the government or the king who has taken a great rabbi even, prisoner, is asking for 500 zloty, I don't know if my currency is correct, then what happens is the Jewish community has to look around and say, you know what, if we're going to pay 500 zlotys for this rabbi, well, then what's going to happen when they take another rabbi? And aren't they going to be motivated to do so because of how lucrative it is? So there was a great rabbi who actually said, do not rescue me. Rabbi Korobkin, you probably know who I'm speaking of. I can't remember his name.
The Maharam Rothenburg.
Yeah, he said, do not rescue me. He ended up his days in prison. He died in prison. Today, you have this situation where families, and Rabbi Asher Weiss said, by the way, this is not a question of money. This is a question of saving lives who they will be killed, they're being tortured, they're being maimed, all the terrible things. He says it's not a question of money here, it's a question of saving lives. So we need to do everything we can to save hostages. The families of those who are hostages, and there's no greater rahmanis, no greater sympathy that a person can have, having a child, a grandparent, in the hands of these terrible, evil people. One can only think, my God, what they're going through on a day-to-day basis. But what the hostage families are doing right now is they're standing in front of delivery lines so that humanitarian aid cannot be delivered to Gaza. I'd like to entertain that debate for a moment from an ethical point of view. Is, of course, I understand why the families are doing this. If I were a family member, I might just as well be doing this as well. What should we be doing in order to rescue the hostages, sometimes in peril of the war itself? How far should we be going? Menachem, let's start with you.
Well, that's an incredible question. My God, I don't know how I'd answer. I mean, I understand the grievances of the hostages, the parents of the hostages. I mean, it's incredible, and they want to get more. It's an interesting thing, socially symbolically. What's going on right now is because you have like a conflict between the world wanting humanitarian aid going into Gazans, which is of course very important, and then you have their demand to be recognized for the fact that there are hostages in there. There's like a media, socially symbolic media controversy going on right now, and it's fascinating. It brings up a lot of moral and ethical questions. I think one of the first thoughts that came to my mind when I saw that is I don't think that the recognition of the hostages is it hasn't beaten out what's going on with Gaza. I think in terms of social media, I go on social media all the time. I'm combing the feeds all the time on X. On Instagram, I'm always, I post stuff on Facebook about stuff that I see that I think is very relevant. I write about it, and I see a lot of flow going in that direction. And I can understand why there might be a socially symbolic grievance based on the recognition that's being given in the world right now. I think there's a deficit of the recognition of grievances of the hostages. And and I hate to do this. I had a professor when I was in graduate school. He called this, if you want to talk about this, called comparative suffering. Who's suffering more, this group or that group. And he said he didn't like it when it was done with, he was gay, and he didn't like it when it was done with gays, this comparative suffering of gays and other people. But I think, over here, I do think it is relevant because the world's interest, I think it's an important thing that the hostages are saying, that the parents of the hostages are saying about their children. I think there is a lack of recognition. There needs to be more. And there's a media fight. I see it every day. I see people go on social media, influencers every single day, like Rosenberg and that one guy, like Michael Rosenberg, or he's on Daily, that one guy who's he writes for Sacha Baron Cohen from England. I'm forgetting the guy's name. He's a screenwriter. And he's constantly out there. They're usually together, those two. Every single day they're pounding Barry Weiss. Every day they have to say the hostages count, the hostages matter, the hostages matter. Think about what's going on over there, because they know that this is what they're up against in the social media world.
Michael Kegel.
Well, I'll answer this question. I can answer it very confidently, because I confidently know that I don't know anything whatsoever. I have no way to answer this question. So I can tell you confidently that what I would personally love to see, I would love to see the state of Israel put together a panel of 70 individuals, all of whom are highly respected by everyone in the nation, and that these 70 individuals would sit down and make a decision about what to do, and then publicize it. And then just, Tzahal would go ahead and do what they have to do or not to do.
Who are these 70 individuals? What are their backgrounds?
Well, I would love for them, it'd be really nice if they were all rabbis. Although, I'm an Orthodox Jew, but I think it'd be nice to get a couple of women in there. I think it'd be nice to see 70 people that if they're not rabbis, although I really think they should be rabbis, because I think the answer it's an answer that Hashem should give us. And I think that the way to do that now is probably, since we don't have Nevuah now, probably the best way to do it is to get 70 really smart, really good Jewish people, really good people that have good reputations and everyone likes them, and they've proven themselves wise. And these 70 people should come up with an answer to this question: what to do with the Jews who are right now living in dark tunnels, and should we should we ransom them and exchange them for, should we, in exchange for saving their lives, set loose killers who hate Jews, throughout the state of Israel, or should we go in and nuke them? I think it'd be great if 70 wise Jewish people could give an answer to that question. Because I sure as hell don't have one.
Rabbi Korobkin.
There's been a tremendous amount of literature that's come out in the last 30, 40 years about the ethics of pidyon shvuyim, of ransoming hostages, especially during wartime. Peacetime and wartime are two separate issues in and of themselves, because during peacetime, if let's say there's a soldier or someone who's a captive and there's a ceasefire, there's more of a rationale to extend oneself even further in order to ransom the hostage back. During a time of war, you also have to worry about the morale of the army. You have to worry about long-term ramifications. If Israel were to focus exclusively on getting the hostages back and would agree to a ceasefire and all of the conditions that Hamas wants, that would be devastating to the country. It would put us back to where we were on October 7th, except we would still be missing all of those dead people who were killed in that massacre on October 7th. And we would be no better off than we were before, with Hamas, which has sworn in its charter that it will continue doing more and more October 7th. So we have to realize that there are multiple considerations to be taken into account, especially in wartime. And a lot of the literature started, when I gave a shir on that same topic that Rabbi Weiss gave, shortly after October 7th, I used a couple of articles that I had found on this topic, written by ethicists that were discussing issues of war in Israel. And a lot of literature came out with the kidnapping of Nachshon Waxman back in the 90s. Yes. And then another body of literature came out with the trading of Gilad Shalit for 1,000 terrorists that were in Israeli prisons. And many people who are ethicists today trace the October 7th attacks to what we did in order to get Gilad Shalit back. As moral as we think that was, but at the end of the day, several years later, look at the tragedy that culminated in. So again, I'm very much of the opinion, like Michael had pointed out, we know what we don't know. And we also know that it's very, very complex. It's very complicated. So to give sort of these kinds of flip answers as far as what Israel should or should not do is, again, I don't feel that any of us are really in the position other than to sit and watch with concern. We all very much care. I mean, I've been to Israel twice since October 7th. The first time when I went in November, there was a war room in Tel Aviv where the families of the hostages were located, and we met with various families of the hostages. This past trip, we took our group to Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, where there are multiple displays where volunteers are there to make sure that the world does not forget the hostages. I think the role that we have to play right now is not to weigh in as far as what we feel the government and the military should and should not be doing to get the hostages back, but rather to make sure that the world does not forget that there are over 135 hostages still in captivity, and that we have to make sure that the world stays focused on that, so that the world doesn't point fingers at Israel once again and say that we're being disproportionate and that we're being overly cruel. We have to remember, give us our hostages back. We can't talk about anything, about any kind of ceasefire, until these hostages are returned. That should be the primary focus.
So I have one question for each one of you as we wrap up, different questions. Rabbi, I do want to say, and I think it's appropriate to say, because we have to be makir tov, we have to be appreciative of our leadership, always, especially leadership who is courageous and brave. And I've said this in an interview. We've had a couple of interviews, you and I together. I'm so happy that the Jewish world has you in the position that you're in, because you're the Orthodox rabbi, who goes and meets with imams. You're the Orthodox rabbi that will go to a program at a conservative or reform temple or synagogue. And while some people might say, well, big deal, that's trite, it's not trite. It's important. And I say kol hakavod to you. And I think it's well worth mentioning, because you're brave, you're a courageous leader, and I think that so many things that you have done have furthered the cause of the Jewish people in Canada, in Toronto for sure, and I would argue throughout the world, especially in your leadership as the president of the Rabbinical Council of America. My question to you very succinctly is, are we going to be okay?
Well, first of all, thank you for those undeserved accolades. I can only tell you that I have been very desirous of meeting with imams, but I have to tell you that my whole paradigm has shifted since October 7th. The people who I thought were my friends and the people who I reached out to in the Muslim community, all I've gotten back are crickets. And it's been extremely heartbreaking personally, because I thought that I had created relationships that were meaningful and substantive, and that this October 7th has proven that to be not the case. And that anti-Semitism is alive and well, even among the people that we break bread with, and that we hug and say loving words to. So are we going to be okay? Let me direct you to a great song. There's a group called Five for Fighting. Have you heard of that group?
No.
Menachem, you should know that group. It's
Menachem, you should for sure know it, Mo.
Yeah. And the name of the song is called Okay. And the refrain of the song is, "We are not okay." Now, you might think that this is a song about Israel, but it's not. It's a song about Western civilization. We are not okay when the world has lost its moral compass. When the world, on the day of October 7th, a huge segment of Western society went out to celebrate the massacring of thousands of Jews. This is long before Israel retaliated. This was just a rejoicing over the killing of Jews. We are not okay. Are we going to be okay? As a rabbi, my job is to boost the morale of my congregation. As a rabbi, my job is to not be a fearmonger and not to cause people to cower in fear. And my constant message to the congregation is, hold your head up high as a Jew, be proud as a Jew. You live in Canada, which is still very safe despite the protests and the in-your-face kind of intimidations that we're experiencing, but exercise your free speech and do not allow the haters to intimidate you and cause you to cower in silence and submission. That's the message that we have to continue giving. I also very much believe that the safest and best place for a Jew to live today is in Eretz Israel. Mm-hmm. And I have been giving that as my regular mantra. The very first Shabbos that I came to Toronto, I announced to the congregation that my job is to turn off the lights after you've all made Aliyah.
Yeah, right.
And I believe that today more than ever. What is going to happen to Canada? It's anyone's guess. Will things stabilize if, God willing, we get a prime minister who has some semblance of morality? Forgive my politics for a moment. Maybe Canada will stabilize and renormalize, and the same thing will be true of the United States. But there's no question that it's not about me. It's about my children and, more importantly, my grandchildren. We have lasted in this diaspora longer than we've lasted in many other places with tremendous prosperity. But every diaspora where we've lived, every country that has accepted us in, there's been an expiration date. Poland was probably the longest. We were there for 1,000 years.
Yes.
And it was great for a long time until it wasn't great.
Yes.
And Canada and the United States are going to be the exact same thing. It's great until it's not great. And we just have to make sure that we're not like that frog that you put in a pot of cold water and you turn on the heat and it doesn't have enough common sense to know when to jump out because the water's too hot. We should all pray to have the wisdom to see the signs that are right in front of us to know when it's time to go.
Menachem, I think one of the things that I really love about you, one of the things that reasons I wanted you on this podcast today, again, as I said before, because of your adventuresome nature, it's wonderful what you do. You're always one place or another. I don't know when you have time to teach at university. You embrace your family, and there's constantly pictures of you and your boys. And that is very near and dear to my heart. I have a son who's 17 years old. He's a beautiful kid. I'm honestly not sure how to teach him about the anti-Semitism and the hatred that's directed to you and I and our colleagues and all of our people for what I don't even know. What do you tell your kids about the hatred toward them?
Well, it's interesting. I got my two kids. I have one kid in Eretz Israel who's in yeshiva, and I have another kid who's living with me and going to York University right now, computer science. So it's very interesting because they have two entirely different attitudes about what's going on and approaching it. Shalom's total faith. He's so happy all the time. He's got a smile on his face. He's in the right place. He's in Eretz Israel. He's in yeshiva in the second year of yeshiva. I mean, it's very high madriga, and he loves it. He's embracing it. He's very happy. He travels around Israel. He's like goes, he was just in Efrat, and he's showing me, here's Bethlehem right here. So he's in that space, and there's such a big spirit in Eretz Israel right now that he's feeling it. They're all feeling, all the guys in yeshiva. It's very strong. So talking about anti-Semitism with him is not as urgent as speaking with my son Dov in the house. So my son Dov is he's an intellectual child, very smart kid. He's very moral. He's a very good kid. And he loves discussing things. So he's very ordered in his life. So we have like lunch and we have conversations about the world, what's going on, and he likes intellectual conversations. There's certain past podcasts we both listen to, like Sam Harris. He has some very interesting podcasts on anti-Semitism, Islam, all these types of things. And it's very reasonable. My son really likes Sam Harris. So we talk about those inyanim. And we talk, like what's going on in the world. How does he feel? How are his friends feel? I'm always tuning in with them. With his, what's going on around him. What does he see? So the first I start off is like, what are you seeing? And actually the dialogue I'll start, I want to get to cut to the chase here, but with this is that, I remember when Kanye, both of my kids were here when Kanye did all that stuff with, I love Hitler's a cool guy kind of stuff, the tour, cool guy tour. I remember my kids coming back and my friends telling me, and like, both my children about Kanye. It's like, it really woke up my son to like Jewishness. I don't think it's the right approach to approach Jewishness through anti-Semitism. It's not the right way, but it's definitely making them and all of his friends aware. And we talk about what's going on right now and how they're interpreting it. But I think there's an awareness of Jewishness, and I think that could be a good thing, even though it's a bad thing. The good thing can come out of this because now all of his friends realize that they're the odd ones out in society today. There's the majority, what's going on around them, and they're all feeling this, and they're all thinking more about what it means to be Jewish publicly, or just as a Jew. And I think that's a good starting point. Like Sartre has Judaism wrong, but he's right. It's a good starting point for discussions about Jewishness. Is something happens, like there's a famous scene. Jean Amri, the famous Viennese journalist and thinker, and I've written about, and he has this moment. He writes about this one famous essay in this book. Was it Against the Limits? I think, isn't that right? It was Against something Limits. I'm forgetting the Beyond the Limits, something like that. I think that's the name of it. The book, the collection, and he talks about this one moment which changed his life. And that moment was when he opened the paper up and he saw that the Nuremberg laws had been passed. And he realized at that moment that he is a dead man walking. And I am a Jew. And he had a big awakening he said, all my life I was a secular Jew. All my life we had a Christmas tree and everything. We had, I didn't know anything about Jews or Jewishness. We never talked about it. And now all of a sudden I realized now I'm a dead man because I'm a Jew. So now I have to think about this. And he dedicates his, that wonderful book about, understanding. He's a follower of Sartre. And out of that, he starts thinking more about what it means to Jew. And he ultimately becomes a Zionist at the end of his life, and that's coming from a Marxist perspective too. That's the kind of guy he is. So it's an interesting phenomenology, Marxism, Sartre, and all this. It's like, for me, I'm very influential, very articulate, very straight about what it means. I think a lot of secular Jews are now thinking about Jewishness, but we have to come to understand, so how do you go from understanding anti-Semitism that way to understand what it means to be a Jew? I mean, these are big questions. I don't have any answers. I just know that I'm speaking to my son about it and getting what he feels. I have some idea of it. I could talk to him about it, but my academic ideas don't always work. But we're having lunch. We talk about it at lunch. We talk about Judaism.
Have a good egg salad sandwich. I think one of the things that I'd like to mention about the book, The Jew and the Anti-Semite by Sartre, is that he says that it's very easy to put people down and to feel really special about yourself. And he argued, I think, that bourgeoisie France did that to the Jew. Push them down, make them into vermin, as the rabbi, I believe that's a word he used before. And if he's vermin, well, then I must be very special. That's an interesting point of view about anti-Semitism. Michael Kegel, I've always been fascinated by the direction that you've taken in life. It's you remember the movie The Brother-in-Laws, where he goes, "Run, serpentine, serpentine, serpentine." Remember that? And I've kind of found that I believe you started in Toronto. Are you a Toronto born?
I'm a Sabra.
Were you born in Israel?
Yeah, born. Yeah. I was born in Beersheba. And as I mentioned, I left when as a boy after the Yom Kippur War.
Yes, you mentioned that. Yes, but you came to Toronto. You did a lot of video work, a lot of work on TV with the Hecht's family. Rabbi Hecht, he should rest in peace. His daughter Dodi Lee, she should be well, and the other kids. And then you ended up back in Israel, and eventually you're now in Budapest, right?
Well, I'm in both. I'm mostly in Israel, but I fly into Budapest once a month. So right now, but I'm going back on Thursday.
Do you feel, to use a word I think that is in sync with your way of life, your Chabad, do you feel like a shaliach? Do you feel like a representative of the Jewish people in Vienna? When you walk along the street, are you cognizant of you, the Jew?
Always. But I don't think. I mean, I'm a card-carrying Chabad shaliach, but first of all, my definition of Chabad shaliach is very broad. So I think a lot of people are Chabad shluchim, wouldn't even call themselves that. For example, my dear friend Menachem Foyer, and I think if you're not a Chabad shaliach, you're a shaliach of the Eibishter anyway. So what does it really matter? I mean, you don't have to be a shaliach of the Rebbe. You know, be a shaliach of Rav Soloveitchik. If you be a shaliach of any great Rav, it doesn't have to be a Jew is a shaliach, of course. At the beginning of this discussion, I quoted the book of Exodus, which says that we are mamlechet kohanim. We are kohanim. That is our office. So by definition, we Jews are shluchim, and you have to. You have no choice but to be a shaliach. You're a shaliach. Look at you, man. Look, you're such a shaliach. Look at you. I mean, you could be, you could be out there doing all kinds of crazy, rebellious things. I know you. I've known you for a while, and I know you have all kinds of really interesting problems with Yiddishkeit, which are well warranted, I would say. And you could be like you could be like a bat out of hell with Judaism, and here you are, putting on a Jewish talk show, inviting rabbis and Jewish professors, and right? You're a shaliach. You're like a total embodiment of a shaliach.
Yeah, I wish being a shaliach would pay more.
Right?
Right? Yeah. But I thank you for that. I thank you for your kind words. I want to wrap things up. Does anybody want to throw out a thought or idea before we wrap things up? Any thoughts?
I think we're all.
Yes, I have one thought. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We all
Thank
agree
you,
that we all agree that we're fans of Avrum, and that's why we're on your show today.
Very nice. Thank you.
Absolutely.
By the way, that's why I set up this show. It's the accolades. But I want to include by saying, clearly, Am Yisrael Chai. Oseh Shalom b'mamav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'miromein. I had Hillel Hulkin on the show last week. I just gave away the answer for the milk and honey giveaway, and he told me, he says, I have problems with the Jewish people, but he says I would never ever choose anything else, ever. And when you read his books, be it Letters to My Zionist Friend or his most recent book, Essays of a Complicated Jew, you see within him the amazing dimensions that exist within the Jewish people. We complain, midlonanim, weren't there enough graves in Egypt? Yeah, couldn't you have left us there? And we continue to ask God and our leadership, oh man, it's not easy to be a Jew, Shvertz Zayin Yid, but yet we embrace it and we love it. And quite frankly, especially through my learning of Torah over the last 4 years, which has been pretty intense. And by the way, I thank my dear Rabbi Daniel Korobkin for that. I am just prouder and prouder to be a Jew. So with all these questions, with all this wonderment, with all these challenges, thank God that we're Jews. Thank God we're Jews.
Amen.
It's a beautiful people to be. So I want to thank you guys very much for being with me. God bless you.
Avram, can I also just say one last thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
And that is that I enjoy as much being together with these distinguished panelists, especially when we don't agree on everything.
So do I.
And the fact of the matter is that the Jewish people are experiencing unprecedented unity after a time when we were very, very separated from each other. And I am in love with my fellow Jew more
Right.
than ever. And I think I
Right.
speak for everyone that's on this call. The same is true. And I just pray that we maintain that brotherly love until the end of time. And let's
I
not let
agree.
anything ever separate us again.
I agree with you, Rabbi Daniel. And I'll tell you something. Years ago, I watched Madonna in an interview, and she, whichever way you cut it, she's pretty progressive, or was progressive in what she did. She was huge, and she was creative, and she was different. And she said, "I don't understand why people criticize me all the time. Why they don't want to emulate my progressiveness, my growth, my passion for what I do." And I've often sort of taken that, and I've wondered that about the non-Jewish world. Why don't they want to emulate the beauty that we have? Why don't all the Arab countries want to say, yeah, you know what? We can prosper like the Jewish people did in Israel. Let's become business partners with them at least and move forward. So it's a quandary. It's a quandary. Anyways, Zygazin to everybody. It's so nice being with you guys. I love it. I love listening to you. And I think also this is very indicative of Elu Vielu, that you can have an open discussion and disagree with your colleague, but at the end of it, we embrace one another. So well done, Yeshua. And I thank you for all my viewers. I will be back next week, and I'm going to have a one-on-one with my very dear friend, Rabbi Daniel Korobkin. So make sure to be here again Sunday, 2, actually. You have a chavrusa at 1, so we don't want to, ruin that. So thank you. It's the Avrum Rosensweig Show. It's an inspirational podcast. Really, really speaking to people who are fascinating and have done wonderful things in life. So thank you so much. Take care.